Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jeffrey Epstein Show. I'm your host, Bobbycapucci, and this is Daily Drop number 364. We've talked a lot about the financial aspects of the Jeffrey Epstein criminal enterprise, and we have also talked a lot about the FinCen files. We talk about how these offshore LLCs and the shell companies are basically the lifeblood for people like Epstein and others who are involved in the underbelly of the world. Well, we're going to talk today about tax havens. We're going to talk a little bit about offshore finance, and we're going to explain it a little bit with the help of an article from the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. Now, you should be familiar with these folks, considering they're the ones who broke the FinCen files investigation as well. So today, we're going to go through this article, and we're going to talk about tax havens. What in the hell are they, how they're established, what their role is, and all of that other stuff that will continue to add context to the financial angle of this case, which, as you all know, if you've been listening to the podcast anyway, I think is a very, very important avenue, considering his financial ties, deep financial ties to so many movers and shakers. I think that if the investigation is conducted correctly and done with the aggressiveness that it should be done with, that it will not be hard to establish the fact that Jeffrey Epstein was using tax havens, was using shell companies, was using different means to hide money, and I think it will be rather obvious as those investigations progress and they turn up more evidence that the people who were involved with Jeffrey Epstein were also engaging in financial crimes as well. So I really think that as this case grows and we see that occurring, especially down in the Virgin Islands where Denise George has 100% begun to turn this into, at the very least, a civil RICO case. So we're going to go over tax havens tonight, and we're going to add a little bit more meat to the bone. That way, when we're discussing all of this stuff, it's easier to put the pieces together, right? And, of course, this sort of thing is super important in the Jeffrey Epstein case when you're talking about the whole entire case in general, because there are so many people that were connected to him financially, so many bigwigs and financial big shots that were involved with Jeffrey Epstein being in charge of their money, that if the proper amount of trees are shaken and the proper amount of doors are kicked in, it's going to be very apparent what was going on here. And if we understand just exactly how these people hide their money and what vehicles are used to do so, then when all of the pieces of the puzzle come together, it'll be a lot easier to understand all of this stuff if we have all of the context that we possibly can have. So with that said, let's jump into this article and let's talk about tax havens. This article, as I said earlier, is from the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. The authors are Will Fitzgibbon and Ben Hallman. This article was published on April 6th of 2020. Tax revenues keep civilization afloat, but not all taxpayers play by the same set of rules. With the help of lawyers, accountants, white shoe professionals, and complicit Western governments, the wealthy and well-connected have avoided paying trillions of dollars in taxes. And there's no doubt about that, right? I am certainly not somebody who is ever going to champion high taxes. I'm not a big fan. But I am a big fan of these companies and these individuals that use these loopholes that aren't available to the common folks. Well, I am a big fan of them paying their fair share for sure. There's no reason that these billionaires that are parking their money overseas to avoid taxes should be able to get away with it. They should have to pony up their fair share. And if they don't like what the percentage is, well, maybe they should yank on the chain of their dogs in Congress to have them change it. They shouldn't be hiding their money overseas. They shouldn't be parking it in these LLCs, and they certainly shouldn't be getting away with it. Not when you and I have to account for every single dime. The rest of us cover the difference, or more commonly, can't, leaving treasuries bereft of monies needed to build roads, schools, and tackle existential threats like climate change and global pandemics. Yeah, there's no doubt. The money laundering is such a huge hit. And while it gets lost in the sauce for the most part in the Western world, in these developing countries, it is a lot more of a hindrance, right? A lot bigger of a burden. When you have these oligarchs and kleptocrats enriching themselves on the money of the people, while the people continue to get hosed and don't have their needs met, their basic needs met by their government. And that is the pool that Jeffrey Epstein was playing in. That's the pool that Jeffrey Epstein was excelling in. And that is certainly the pool that all of his friends were also swimming around in. Tax havens make it all possible. By some estimates, about 10% of the total output of all the economies in the world is parked in offshore financial centers held by shell companies that exist only on paper. The cost of governments in lost revenue is estimated to exceed $800 billion a year. That's $800 billion with a B, folks. Think about that. All of that money grifted by the already wealthy. It's certainly not any, person in your neighborhood that's making moves on this $800 billion and siphoning it off. It's the kleptocrats, it's the bureaucrats, it's the oligarchs, the same people that would have you hating your neighbor and think that your neighbor is an existential threat to you are really the ones that are a true threat, are really the ones that keep our lives from being as good as they should be. And you see it here. I mean, these people are richer than you could possibly imagine, and they still have to steal. They still have to avoid paying taxes. That is just the way the game is played for the so-called elite, for so-called polite society. But people are starting to wake up. And when you lock people in their homes for 6 months and they have nothing better to do, well, they start to pay attention to who is really pulling the strings, to who the puppets are, and to who the puppeteers are. And as people wake up around the world, it's going to be a whole hell of a lot harder for these people to continue with their tried and true ways of pillaging the wealth from the rest of us. The wealthy keep the money to build intergenerational fortunes, creating a new global aristocratic class and exasperating the divide between the global haves and have-nots. And what have we seen during this pandemic? The most incredulous transfer of wealth from the bottom up. Sure, people are back at work, but who isn't back at work? The hardest people hit. The people that have the least amount of education. The people that are going to be the hardest to rehire. And somehow that seems to not be a point of conversation. Somehow that doesn't seem to be driving what's going on in Washington, D.C. As these 8, 9, 10, 15 million people don't matter. We're not talking about people that were laying around on their couches all day. We're talking about people who had the rug pulled out from underneath them by these lockdowns. And then, like usual, the government doesn't make right. Oh, sure, 12 weeks of an extra $600 a week for unemployment. Great, awesome. But what about after that? Nothing. But you see the transfer of wealth, this great transfer of wealth, continue to occur, while the most vulnerable amongst us are now staring at serious trouble starting December 26th, December 31st, when people's unemployment starts running out. And I know that in Las Vegas alone, we're looking at a legit apocalypse of people losing their homes and being kicked out of their apartments. An absurd number of homes aren't up to date on their bills, and it's not going to get any better. But meanwhile, while all of that was happening, folks, while you were asleep, these people were transferring our wealth to their coffers. These people were transferring our wealth to their bank accounts. And while people suffer on Main Street, the grifters and the thieves on Wall Street continue to get fat. Multinational companies use the extra cash to reward shareholders and edge out smaller competitors. Yeah, and mom and pop stores continue to go by the wayside for big box shops. And then when shit goes south and there's PPP money to be had or money for Main Street, somehow it inevitably ends up in the pockets of the big businesses such as Walmart, etc., etc. And meanwhile, Wall Street continues to stack their chips while Main Street flounders. Countries that need tax revenue the most lose more tax money as a percentage of GDP than wealthy countries. As with other inequities, the poor get it the worst. And it trickles down like that even in the Western world, folks. I mean, let's be real. 25% finance rates from the bank, that should never be occurring. All it does is keep poor people poor. And I know the counter argument, well, you should have paid your bills. Well, maybe people would be able to pay their bills if their finance rate was only 12%. And even that's crazy and draconian. These banks shouldn't be charging a higher VIG than the mafioso boss down the block. Are you kidding me right now? But they get away with it. My question is, for how much longer are we going to let them get away with it? How much longer are we going to let these scumbags enable people like Jeffrey Epstein and steal the wealth right out from underneath us? Years after Panama Papers, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists remains committed to exposing those who exploit tax havens. A long list that also includes corrupt politicians, mobsters, drug traffickers, and other criminals who launder cash and assets through offshore companies to throw law enforcement off the scent. The easy movement of illicit money destabilizes governments and helps despots stay in power. And that we've seen it with every single one of these strongmen, so-called strongmen, from Gaddafi on down. How much of their money do they have offshore? How many billions are hidden offshore while their people can't even get a meal? And these people are celebrated. These people aren't damned on the world stage. Billions and billions of dollars stolen from their people. Hidden offshore, all to enrich themselves. Here's a guide we've assembled to help explain how offshore finance works and why it matters. If you have questions we haven't answered, you can email us here. So obviously, click on the link when you check out this episode, and you'll have the hyperlink so you can email the actual journalist who wrote the article if you have some questions, or you could shoot me an email and I'll try and answer them as well. What is a tax haven? There is no universal definition, but tax havens or offshore financial centers are generally countries or places with low or no corporate taxes that allow outsiders to easily set up businesses there. Tax havens also typically limit public disclosure about companies and their owners. Because information can be hard to extract, tax havens are sometimes also called secrecy jurisdictions. Tax havens nearly always deny being tax havens. And, when you think about tax havens, right, here in America, you think about like the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, offshore, but no. America is one of the biggest perpetrators of this nonsense, and that's all because the financial sector is not regulated at all. Very little regulation, and under Trump, hardly anyone went to prison for white-collar crime. And I understand they were trying to cut the red tape and trying to get business booming, and I get it. But at the same time, there has to be a happy medium and a balance. And these white-collar criminals, these money launderers, these people that are enabling people like Jeffrey Epstein, they need to be held accountable for the way they steal, from the way they grift, and from the way they continue to keep poor people poor. Where are these tax havens? All over the world. Some are independent countries like Panama, the Netherlands, and Malta. Others are within countries like the U.S. state of Delaware or are territories like the Cayman Islands. ICIJ investigations have focused on different tax havens, often depending on the origin and content of the documents. Panama Papers, for example, exposed how Mossack Fonseca, one of the biggest offshore law firms in the world, sold thousands of shell companies in the British Virgin Islands to clients around the globe. Mortis leaks examined how companies used Mortis to avoid taxes, while Paradise Papers revealed the secrets of Bermuda, the island where the law firm Appleby was founded. So these are all of the leaks that have come out, the Panama Papers, the Paradise Papers, and they have built this picture for us that we have had in front of us leading up to the FinCen files. And then when the FinCen files were dropped, obviously, it added more context, more meat to the bone, as I like to say. And it made the picture come in just that much clearer. Do we have the full picture yet? No, we do not. But it sure is starting to take shape. Some tax havens, like Niue and Vanuatu, have cleaned up their act under international pressure, while others, like Dubai, are emerging as new hotspots of illicit wealth. That doesn't shock me, considering all of the wealth that you will find in Dubai, all of the rich people looking to skate on taxes. Doesn't shock me for one single minute to hear or think that Dubai would be one of these tax havens. Certainly falls right in to line with how we see things moving around the world, right? It seems like some of the most industrialized countries, including the United States of America, are leading the way for being tax havens. So we know we have a lot of jawing from American politicians as of late about bringing these people to heel, but we'll see, right? Considering that there hasn't been much of a change as, at the top, how can we think that there's going to be change as far as it goes when it comes to these tax havens? So I'll need to be convinced of that. Their words are fine and all, but I'm going to need some action from the U.S. politicians that say they're staunch about making sure that these people that are engaging in these financial crimes are no longer able to manipulate the financial system the way they have been able to for all of these years. Why would a country or state decide to become a tax haven? Money. Tax havens make significant income from fees paid by people and companies who create and use shell companies. Tax havens also create work for lawyers, accountants, and secretaries. Mauritius, for example, has said 5,000 people would lose jobs if the country stopped being a tax haven. So you see what they do there, right? They intertwine it with the actual economy, the real economy. And then they bring in secretaries and the sort. And when things start going south, they'll point to those folks and be like, well, all of these people are going to lose their jobs if we can't make this, if this can't be a tax haven anymore. Meanwhile, those jobs are basically being used to help these people launder money. So I don't really know why any country or district would play ball with these people. I get it. The money is a draw, but now, especially as people are starting to focus more on this and more journalists are beginning to write about this problem and how big it is, I think that these districts or little islands or republics or whatever would be crazy to get into bed with as a shell company with some of these corporations. What is a shell company? A shell company is a legal entity created in a tax haven. Shell companies typically exist only on paper, with no full-time employees and no office. A single office building in the Cayman Islands, for example, is home to 19,000 shell companies. Rules differ, but the actual owners of many shells are not disclosed in incorporation documents. Some use the term shell company and offshore company interchangeably. Now, you see why we talk about this when it comes to Epstein, considering all of the shell companies he had in the Virgin Islands. Look, it was not a coincidence he was located down there, right? He was getting a great deal on a lot of these LLCs, offshore shell companies that he had down there. He was getting a sweetheart deal on the taxes, and he knew that people were going to look the other way for his behavior because of these entities that he had there. He was pumping money into the hands of the bureaucracy. So, Jeffrey Epstein and his enterprise was in the Virgin Islands for many reasons, and they were on the island for many reasons. One of those reasons, in my opinion, is because of how prevalent the money laundering was, and the LLCs and shell companies and that whole entire situation for him to stay off the grid with his shadow money down in the Virgin Islands. That played a huge part in it. Why are they called shell companies? Because, like an empty shell, there's nothing inside. A shell company exists legally only on paper. And like we talked about a second ago, 19,000 shell companies in one building in the Cayman Islands. Yeah, because that's possible, right? What are shell companies used for? Legal and illegal purposes. Shell companies can hold money, luxury homes, intellectual property, businesses, and other assets. They also play a vital role in facilitating the flow of illicit money around the globe, and we have established that with our conversations here. I mean, let's be real. The art world especially is rife with money laundering and dark money being moved around, and the art being used as the vehicle for that to occur. You know, these people think they're slick, right? And for years, this has been a great market for them to make their moves and to play their games. But once again, people are catching on, and people are starting to pay attention, and the silence that once surrounded them by the people that they abused is no longer guaranteed. People are seeing that they're not alone, and they're not going to just be laughed at and told that they're liars, and they're coming forward to put these scuzzbags on blast, and you're going to see it happen more and more as this case gets deeper. Who uses tax havens and why? Rich but otherwise average folk, including dentists and at least one Alabama greengrocer, use shell companies for reasons that may include making it harder for potential creditors, including former spouses, displeased business partners, or tax inspectors, to identify and recoup monies allegedly owed. Investments made through tax shelters can be especially lucrative, owing to the significant tax savings offshore companies may enjoy. And again, there are a lot of people that are utilizing these shell companies, right? People that don't want to pay their fair share of taxes, want to stash that money, or like they're saying here, they're trying to hide some dough from their wives or from their business partners or whatever it is. And while that's all fine and well, it has to be regulated. I get it. You don't want your estranged ex-wife or your estranged ex-husband to have their portion of that 85 grand that you just made in Las Vegas hitting the tables or betting on sports, and you want to go park it offshore. I get it, bro. I understand. But unfortunately, these dirtbags like Epstein and all of his scumbag friends have ruined it for everybody. So now the whole damn thing needs to be regulated. And Bob Geldorf, Madonna, and U.S. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross are among the bold-faced names that ICIJ has linked to shell companies. Some, like Queen Elizabeth II, say they don't even know they have invested offshore. No, of course not. They have no idea. No idea. We don't know that we invested offshore. We don't know that Prince Andrew's a sick, disgusting bastard. We don't know any of it. That's what they would have you believe. But everybody knows that old money, like the money of the Windsors, is buried offshore, probably in safes, right? In treasure chests like the pirates used to have and shit. Wouldn't shock me. These people come from very old money, folks, and they've been very much manipulating the system for a very long time. Imagine what a full audit of the royal house of Windsor would turn up. Politicians like Iceland's former prime minister, Sigmundur David Gunnlaugsson, and Nigeria's former Senate president, Bukola Saraki, have concealed investments or luxury homes with the help of shell companies. So have their children. Notables include the son and daughter of former Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif and Isabel dos Santos, the billionaire daughter of former Angolan strongman president Jose Eduardo dos Santos. Oh, I'm sure that none of that money that their kids stashed offshore was pilfered from the people or made off of their hard work and stolen from them. I'm sure none of that occurred. You notice none of these people go to prison, folks, ever? None of these people ever have to pay any kind of penalty for their behaviors, for their stealing, from their outright larceny of our future? Drug lords and ladies, bank robbers and arms traffickers, mafia kingpins and queens, and bribe takers and makers also use shell companies to obscure their identities and conceal money, assets, and illicit activities. Let's add human traffickers to that as well. Because we know that Jeffrey Epstein's lifeblood and the money he used in his dark, sadistic world was pumped through the heart of the financial system. Is owning or using a shell company illegal? The short answer is no. The longer answer is that it depends on how it is used and where the shell company is created or incorporated. Hiding stolen assets abroad is clearly illegal, but buying a luxury yacht with a shell company may not be. Hello, Microsoft's Paul Allen and Saudi Prince Mohammed bin Salman Al Saud. Lawyers and accountants are very good at proposing technically legal ways to spend or stash cash offshore. I wonder how much Indike was involved in that shit with Epstein, huh? I wonder how much money was parked offshore that no one knows about. Oh, I'm guessing a lot. In my opinion, Jeffrey Epstein definitely has money in the billions. Only 600 and some change is on the books, but there's definitely more, folks. How do companies benefit from tax havens? Businesses, especially those that transact across borders, can enjoy massive tax savings by routing payments, profits, or investments through subsidiaries in offshore financial centers. And that's a genius move, right? They pay taxes through the subsid then, offshore, and they avoid getting whacked by the tax man in, whatever country they're trying to avoid the tax man in. A big pharmaceutical company, for example, might set up a new entity in Bermuda or the Netherlands and sell that entity a patent for a profitable drug. The parent company might then pay a big licensing fee to the offshore company, which in turn would allow it to record lower profits at home and pay a lower tax bill. Drug companies have avoided billions of dollars in taxes this way, according to Oxfam, while at the same time charging you $1 bazillion for your medicine charging you $1 bazillion to make sure that you don't get sick, and all at the same time producing shit like OxyContin by the assload, causing all sorts of misery and death. But at the same time, screw you on the other side, by the way. They're not going to pay any taxes on that either. They're going to park that shit offshore, and you can go kick rocks. What are you going to do about it? They own your local politician. Well, are you going to keep sending your local politicians back to D.C., folks? Or are we going to do a better job and ditch the incumbents? Each year, companies avoid paying more than $500 billion in taxes using methods like these. Some pay little or no taxes at all in their home countries. Notable corporate tax avoiders include Apple, Johnson & Johnson, and Skype. Well, it doesn't shock me with Johnson & Johnson. They can't run a football team to save their lives. Their family member had a property that they gave half of to Jeffrey Epstein and had their money managed by Jeffrey Epstein, and they can't even make powder that doesn't give you cancer. So why anyone would have any kind of confidence in Johnson & Johnson paying their fair share is beyond me. Apple? I mean, come on. They're using slave labor over in China. I mean, give me a break already with Apple. And Skype? I don't know much about their company, but pretty sure that they're scummy as well. All of these so-called masters of the universe from Silicon Valley and their subs are all scary as hell, folks. And they really, truly think that they can control our lives and censor what we hear and what we don't hear. And it's pretty terrifying. Some straight up 1984 Orwellian type shit. Companies often say shell companies encourage foreign investment and get deals done that wouldn't otherwise. Well, then the deal doesn't get done. You find another deal then. I'm pretty tired of this too big to fail mentality. Now, it would be one thing if these corporations took care of us, right? It would be one thing if these corporations took care of their employees and gave a shit. But they don't. You think they give a damn? They really do not. And I know that for a fact because, well, I worked for a corporation, too, in fact, for a very long time. And then I've seen the way that they've treated people here in Las Vegas during this pandemic. You know how many people that were furloughed from their jobs that had good union jobs, working as cocktail waitresses or bartenders, etc., just lost their insurance on October 31st? In the middle of a pandemic, and then these corporations have the audacity to try and get money from a bailout? It is a bunch of bullshit, and these corporations are a joke. So if you can't get the deal done otherwise, with all of your fancy schmancy people from Harvard and the rest of the cesspools, then maybe the deal shouldn't get done, and maybe somebody else should step into your place and make a better deal. They also incorporate offshore, many say, to avoid paying taxes twice on the same pot of money. Experts say that such defenses are either overblown or mythical. It's true. They are overblown or mythical. These people are putting their money offshore for the simple reason of making sure that they don't pay their fair share. Well, you have to pay every nickel and dime. These rich, disgusting sons of bitches are finagling and loopholing the same way Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein were loopholing in their trials and in their criminal cases. It shouldn't shock you, though, because we know from our year together here that the whole entire game is rigged. And the playbook, when it comes to the way they manipulate things in a court case or when they're manipulating things financially, is certainly carried out in the same manner. If you'd like to contact me, you can do that at bobbycapucci@protonmail.com. That's BOBBYCAPUCCI@protonmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at BOBBY_CAPUCCI. All of the links that go with this episode can be found in the description box. To everybody who has donated to the podcast, thank you folks very much. I'll be back tomorrow morning with the morning update, and we will pick up where we left off. I hope you all have a fantastic night.